Welcome to Mr. Nightmare Dating. Now I know a lot of you use these videos to sleep, so before you drift off I thought it would be a fun idea if everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world. Also like and subscribe if you are enjoying the dating horror stories. Right, let's get comfy and relax. Story 1. Bear with me. It gets good towards the end. This happened a couple years ago. The receptionist at one of my clients begged me into meeting her best friend who just moved to LA from Phoenix. She swore up and down we were perfect for each other. I checked out her OKC profile, chatted back and forth for a few days, then talked to the mystery girl once on the phone, and we decided to meet for dinner and drinks at a local bar and grill after her shift. She's a nurse. Was over on a Tuesday night. We meet. She's an adorable, petite, dirty blonde with glasses and freckles. Totally my type. I could tell she was a bit nervous. We sit down and order drinks. She downs her apple martini in less than 5 minutes, orders another and apologizes, stating she wants to loosen up a bit because she's nervous since her friend talked me up so much. Which is odd since I don't even know her friend that well at all. Fast forward a bit. She ended up having 2 martinis before the appetizers came, 2 more in between appetizers and 3 more during dinner, and 1 more right before the check came. Total martinis had by a 5'3" girl in a 3-hour period. 7. Surprisingly, the conversation during this period did quite well. The trouble came as we were about to leave, and she decided to use the restroom before we hit the road. She fell twice on the way, and once on the way back. Since she was clearly hammered, I offered to drive her home and give her some cash for a cab in the morning to pick her car up. She agreed but declined the cash. Mind you, it's nearing midnight, and I have to get up at 5:30 for work. As we are driving toward her apartment, it becomes apparent that, combined with her drunken state and the fact she's lived in the valley for less than 2 weeks, she forgot her address and how to get herself home. We drive around North Hollywood and Studio City for an hour trying to remember her street or any local landmarks. This fails and I'm getting tired/frustrated. I offer to let her stay at my place. Nothing weird. She can crash on my bed and I'll take the couch. She's okay with this. On my way back to my place, she attempts to throw up out the car window, but doesn't realize the window was never open in the first place. Vomit everywhere. Now she's crying and apologizing like crazy. I get her to my apartment, carry her up the 3 flights of stairs, and toss her on my bed. She's out cold. I go downstairs and spend another 40 minutes cleaning out my car, and finally get to sleep on my couch around 2 a.m. Around 4:30 a.m. I'm awoken by a shrill scream coming from my bedroom. I run in wearing just my boxers, flip the light on. The girl pauses for a second, looks at me and screams more, backs into a corner, and throws my nightstand lamp at me while yelling, "Who the fuck are you?" It takes a minute for me to calm her down and explain the situation and remind her of our night. It eventually all comes back to her. She starts crying and apologizing. After I calm her down some more, I give her a ride home. During our ride home, the awkward silence is only broken by her apologizing while sobbing, telling me how to get to her place, and then asking if we hooked up. I told her we didn't, and that I'm not the creepy type to take advantage of girls in her condition. She replied with something along the lines of, "Oh, okay. I'm not typically a lush, and I'm definitely not a slut. I was just super nervous and didn't know my limit last night. You seem great, and I hope we can see each other again." I ended up saying, sure, just to avoid any more awkwardness, gave her an in-car hug, and said goodnight. The next day, while slothing around work in a meeting, she called. It went to voicemail. Immediately she called again. Twice. Finally she left a voicemail. Said voicemail went something like this: "So I was thinking about what I asked you on our way home last night in regards to us hooking up. And I'm kind of curious as to why you didn't try anything with me. Is it because you think you're too good for me, huh? Mr. Big Shot LA guy? Well, whatever. I'm not a slut and don't sleep around, but you missed a shot at some awesome sex last night. So whatever." Click about half an hour later, while I'm still in the meeting, she calls and leaves another voicemail. This time crying. "I'm sorry about what I said earlier. I'm just having trouble adjusting to a new place. I'm homesick. You seem real great. Please call me back and please don't ignore me. Please. I'm sorry." Needless to say, I didn't call her back. Her friend, the receptionist, apologized profusely the next time I saw her. We didn't talk much about it after that. TLDR, blind date and new girl in town gets blackout drunk on first date. Pukes all over my car. Can't drive or remember way to her apartment. Stays at my place in my bed while I sleep on my couch. Wakes up at 4 a.m., doesn't know where she is, freaks out, screams, throws lamp at me. I calm her down, take her home. She calls me 4 times the next day, leaves voicemail scathing me for not taking advantage of her. Calls back shortly after and apologizes, asks to hang out again. I never speak to her again. Story 2. At the time, I was young, dumb, and too caught up in the thrill of it all to notice that everything was about to go sideways. This happened during my second year of college, back when I still believed that dating apps were a viable option for finding decent human beings. Spoiler alert, they are not. But back then, I was optimistic. I just downloaded Tinder, and though my expectations were low, I figured, how bad could it really be? Ryan was one of my first matches, and honestly, he seemed great. His profile was refreshingly normal. Pictures of him hiking, playing with his dog, and holding a coffee mug in what I assumed was an attempt to look intellectual. His bio was short and sweet, just a guy who loves dogs, good books, and spontaneous adventures. I mean, come on. Who doesn't love dogs and good books? He was cute, too, dark hair, nice smile, the kind of face that makes you think, this guy probably helps old ladies cross the street. We started chatting, and I was immediately hooked. Ryan was funny, charming, and surprisingly good at keeping a conversation going, which is practically a lost art on Tinder. He asked me about my classes, my favorite books, and whether I thought I could survive a zombie apocalypse. Spoiler, I could not. He seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me, and I thought, wow, maybe this is the start of something good. After a few days of texting, Ryan asked if I wanted to hang out. Nothing fancy, he said. Just come over, and we'll watch a movie or something. Now, I know what you're thinking. A movie? At his place? On the first date? Listen, I was 20 and still naive enough to believe that watching a movie actually meant watching a movie. Plus, he seemed so nice. What could go wrong? The apartment of doom. When I got to Ryan's apartment, the first thing I noticed was that it was oddly clean. Like suspiciously clean. There were no dirty dishes, no random socks lying around, no weird beer pong table taking up half the living room. It looked like an apartment straight out of an IKEA catalog, which, in hindsight, should have been my first clue that something was off. Hey, Ryan said, flashing that charming smile as he opened the door. Come on in. I stepped inside, and he immediately offered me a drink. I've got beer, wine, or some fancy sparkling water if you're into that. Wine's fine, I said, trying to play it cool. We sat down on the couch with our drinks, and Ryan queued up a movie on Netflix. I don't even remember what it was because, within 5 minutes, we were deep into one of those flirty, back-and-forth conversations where every other sentence is an excuse to touch someone's arm or laugh a little too hard. At some point, the movie became background noise. We were sitting close, like really close, and I could feel the tension building. Ryan leaned in, and before I knew it, we were kissing. Now, let me just say, Ryan was a great kisser. Like, the kind of kisser that makes you momentarily forget how to think straight. Things started escalating quickly, his hand on my waist, my fingers in his hair, that kind of thing. Do you want to move to the bedroom? He asked, his voice low and a little breathless. I nodded, feeling bold and a little giddy. This was it, the kind of spontaneous, movie-worthy moment I'd secretly been hoping for. He led me to his room, and I couldn't help but notice how perfect it looked. The bed was made, the floor was spotless, and there was a candle burning on the nightstand. A literal candle. Who does that? We started kissing again, and things were heating up fast. Shirts came off, and I was just about to unhook my bra when Ryan suddenly froze. Wait, he said, pulling back. What's wrong? I asked, my heart pounding. He stared at me, his face a mix of guilt and panic. I have a girlfriend. Time stopped. My brain short-circuited. I just stared at him, trying to process what he'd just said. You what? I have a girlfriend, he repeated, like that was going to make this any less insane. I blinked, my mouth hanging open. Are you serious right now? He looked down at the floor, rubbing the back of his neck like he was the one having a rough time. I didn't mean for this to happen. We've been having problems, and I don't know. I guess I wanted to feel something different. I sat there in stunned silence, my bra half off, and my dignity somewhere in the next zip code. So what? I said finally. You thought the solution to your relationship problems was to hook up with some random girl from Tinder? Ryan winced. I didn't mean for it to go this far. That doesn't make it better. I snapped, pulling my shirt back on. He stood up, pacing the room like he was the one who had something to be upset about. I swear, I'm not a bad guy. This is all so complicated. Complicated? I said, my voice rising. You have a girlfriend. That's not complicated, that's just cheating. At this point, I was done. I grabbed my stuff and stormed out of his room, muttering every curse word I could think of under my breath. Ryan followed me into the living room, trying to apologize, but I wasn't having it. "Don't talk to me," I said, shoving my shoes on. "But, no, you don't get to but me. Go sort out your relationship problems and leave me out of it." I slammed the door behind me and practically sprinted to my car, fuming the entire way. When I got home, I immediately called Claire and told her everything. She listened patiently, then burst out laughing. "Wait," she said between gasps for air. "He had a girlfriend? And he just forgot to mention that until it was almost too late." "Apparently," I said, still seething. "Girl, you need to write a book. You can't make this stuff up." So here I am, writing about it instead. So I almost hooked up with a guy who forgot to mention he had a girlfriend until we were halfway undressed. Dating is a nightmare, and I'm seriously considering becoming a nun. Story 3. This all went down in late 2020, right in the middle of pandemic weirdness. You know, that time when everyone was either baking sourdough bread or spiraling into existential dread. I was somewhere in the middle, single, working remotely, and spending way too much time in sweatpants. My entire social life had shrunk down to Zoom calls, my cat, and the occasional trip to the grocery store. It had been nearly 2 years since my last breakup, and I wasn't exactly thriving in the romance department. Sarah, my best friend and eternal optimist, decided it was her personal mission to get me back out there. One night over a FaceTime wine session, she hit me with the dreaded line, "You need to download a dating app." I groaned. "Sarah, you know how I feel about dating apps. It's just a parade of dudes holding fish and guys who think a picture of their Jeep is a personality." She rolled her eyes. "Not everyone is like that. Come on, Emma, you're cute, funny, and smart. You just need to find someone worthy of your chaotic energy. And like, it's a pandemic. What else are you going to do?" She had a point. My chaotic energy had mostly been directed at my cat, Milo, who was starting to look deeply unimpressed by my attempts to teach him how to high-five. So after some gentle bullying from Sarah, I caved. I downloaded Hinge because Sarah promised me it was for people who are actually looking for relationships. I still wasn't convinced, but I figured, what's the worst that could happen? Spoiler alert, famous last words. Setting up my profile was like pulling teeth. I agonized over which pictures to use, trying to strike the perfect balance between I look fun and approachable, and I swear I'm not one of those people who makes everything about brunch. Sarah insisted on helping, which is how I ended up with a bio that read, "Can name all 50 states in alphabetical order, but can't parallel park. Let's see who embarrasses themselves first." To my surprise, it actually worked. Within a few days, I had a handful of matches. Most of them fizzled out after a couple of messages, but then there was Jamie. Jamie's profile immediately caught my eye. He wasn't ridiculously hot or anything, but he had this laid-back, outdoorsy vibe that felt normal. His pictures showed him hiking, playing guitar, and hanging out with his dog, a golden retriever named Max, who looked like he belonged in a dog food commercial. His bio said something like, "Lover of books, long hikes, and bad puns. 6 feet 1 inch, because apparently that matters. Dog dad to Max. Yes, he's the goodest boy." It was charming without trying too hard. Plus, he had a dog. I mean, come on. Jamie messaged me first, which is always nice. His opener? "If you could only eat one food for the rest of your life, what would it be? And why is it tacos?" It was cheesy, but in a self-aware way that made me laugh. We started chatting, and it felt easy. He asked real questions, not just the usual, "What do you do for work?" or "What's your favorite color?" He wanted to know about the weirdest thing I'd ever Googled answer, "Do penguins have knees?" and whether I'd ever had a near-death experience, which, at the time, I hadn't yet. After a week of texting, he asked if I wanted to meet up. Normally, I'd be hesitant about meeting someone from an app so soon, but he suggested going for a hike. Outdoors, socially distanced, it felt safe enough. Plus, he picked a trail I knew well, one that was popular but not overly crowded. I figured, what's the harm? We agreed to meet at the trailhead on a Saturday morning. I got there early because I'm one of those people who has to show up everywhere 15 minutes ahead of time. I parked my car and tried to calm my nerves, scrolling through Instagram while sneaking glances at every car that pulled into the lot. When Jamie arrived, I recognized him immediately. He looked exactly like his pictures, tall, lean, with messy dark hair and a scruffy beard. He was wearing a flannel shirt, hiking boots, and a baseball cap, basically ticking off every box on the cute outdoorsy guy checklist. "Emma, right?" he said, flashing me a smile as he walked over. "That's me," I said, trying to sound casual but probably coming off a little too enthusiastic. We did the awkward first date dance, brief hug, overly polite small talk, and a few nervous laughs. Max, his golden retriever, immediately won me over by wagging his tail so hard he nearly knocked himself over. "Max is definitely the more charming one," Jamie joked. "Good to know who the real date is," I said, scratching Max behind the ears. "So far, so good. The first part of the hike was fine. Pleasant, even. The weather was perfect, crisp and sunny, with just enough of a breeze to keep things comfortable. The trail wound through a forested area, with the occasional opening where you could catch a glimpse of the mountains in the distance. Jamie was easy to talk to. We chatted about everything from our favorite movies to the weird quirks of growing up in Colorado. Him versus the Midwest me. He told me about how he'd adopted Max from a shelter and how he was slowly learning to play the banjo because, why not? But then about 20 minutes in, the vibe started to shift. The first offbeat question. "So," Jamie said as we rounded a bend in the trail, "do you think people are born evil, or do they become that way?" It caught me off guard. That's a deep question for a first date." He laughed, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Sorry, I've just been thinking about it a lot lately. You know, like what makes someone do bad things? Is it their upbringing, their environment, or is it just who they are?" I tried to brush it off. "I guess it's a mix of both. Why do you ask?" He shrugged, his expression unreadable. "Just curious." I wanted to believe it was just an awkward question, that maybe he was one of those introspective, overthinking types who liked to wax philosophical. But as we kept hiking, his questions got stranger. "What's the worst thing you've ever done? Do you think everyone deserves a second chance? If you had to disappear, where would you go?" I tried to laugh it off, but I could feel my palms getting sweaty. Was he trying to be deep and thought-provoking? Or was I on a date with someone who was genuinely unhinged? At one point, I said, "You're asking a lot of heavy questions for a Saturday morning." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I guess I just like getting to know people on a deeper level." We eventually reached a clearing with a beautiful view of the mountains. Jamie suggested we stop for a break, so we sat down on a rock, and I tried to focus on how pretty the scenery was instead of the fact that my date might be a future Netflix documentary subject. "Have you ever felt like someone was watching you?" he asked out of nowhere. I froze. "What do you mean?" "Like, have you ever just had this feeling? Like you weren't alone, even when you thought you were?" I forced a laugh. "You're not trying to freak me out, are you?" "No," he said, his tone serious. "I just think it's an interesting thought." At that moment, every instinct in my body was screaming at me to get the hell out of there. I glanced at my phone like I'd just remembered something. "Oh shoot. I told my roommate I'd be back by noon. We should probably head back." Jamie frowned. "We're not that far from the end of the trail. Don't you want to see it?" "Maybe another time," I said, standing up and brushing off my pants. "Sorry, I totally lost track of time." He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "All right, let's head back." The walk back to the parking lot was tense. Jamie was quieter now, and I could feel him watching me out of the corner of his eye. Max trotted along happily, blissfully unaware of the fact that his owner was giving off major Dateline energy. When we finally reached the parking lot, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Thanks for the hike," I said, forcing a smile. "It was nice meeting you." "You too," he said, his expression unreadable. "Drive safe." I got into my car, locked the doors, and drove away as fast as I could without looking back. A few weeks later, I was scrolling through the news when I saw a headline that made my stomach drop. "Man arrested in connection with multiple missing women in Colorado." It was Jamie. The article said he'd been using dating apps to lure women into meeting him in secluded areas, where he would, well, you can guess the rest. I sat there staring at my phone, my hands trembling. I'd been that close to being one of his victims. Story 4. So after a year of being single, I let my best friend, Amanda, convince me to give the apps one more chance. "Oh, come on," she said. "You're just being dramatic. Not everyone on there is a sociopath." Amanda was wrong. Rock Bottom, Part 1, The Businessman. Let me rewind for a second. Last year, I matched with this guy on Bumble. Let's call him Ethan. Ethan's profile was everything a woman in her late 20s/early 30s wants to see. He described himself as a successful business owner, college-educated, and ready to settle down. His pictures were normal, no shirtless selfies, no group shots where I had to figure out which one he was, no weird bathroom mirror pics. He looked normal. We started chatting, and Ethan was good. Like really good. He asked thoughtful questions, he didn't bombard me with cheesy pickup lines, and he made me laugh. He told me he owned a small marketing agency, which I thought was impressive. He even mentioned how he'd spent the past year reflecting on his life, and how he was ready to find someone to settle down with. I thought, wow, maybe this is what all the therapy and bad dates were leading up to. We agreed to meet for coffee. And let me tell you, Ethan was charming. He showed up on time, he complimented me, but not in a creepy or over-the-top way. And he actually seemed interested in what I had to say. I left that date thinking, maybe this is it. Maybe I've finally found a decent guy. Fast forward to 2 days later. I was sitting at my desk at work, scrolling through Facebook, as one does when they're procrastinating, and I got a notification. Someone you may know. I clicked on his profile out of curiosity, and that's when I saw it. Someone had commented on one of his recent photos. Glad you're out, bro, hope you're staying out of trouble this time. Excuse me? Being the curious, nosy person I am, I started digging. And that's when I found out that Ethan had been released from prison 2 weeks before our date. He'd spent the past 14 years in lockup for armed robbery, social security fraud, and child endangerment. 14 years. He was 36, which means he went to prison at 22. His successful marketing agency? Yeah, that was a side hustle he'd started in prison. His year of reflection? That was literal prison time. Needless to say, I blocked him immediately and spent the rest of the evening reevaluating my life choices. Rock Bottom, Part 2, The Cop. Before Ethan, there was Mike. Mike was one of those guys who looked like he'd walked straight out of a Hallmark movie. Clean cut, broad shoulders, big smile, golden retriever energy. He messaged me first with something witty about my bio, and I thought, finally, a guy with a personality. Mike was a cop, or at least that's what he said. He told me he'd been in law enforcement for 10 years and was up for a promotion to chief. I wasn't sure if I was ready to date a cop, but he was so charming and polite that I thought, why not? We went out for drinks, and honestly, the date was fine. Not amazing, not terrible. He seemed like a nice enough guy, but there were a few things that felt a little off. For one, he talked about himself a lot. Like, I could barely get a word in before he'd interrupt me to tell me another story about how he'd saved the day at work. The other thing that bugged me was how vague he was when I asked him about his job. I'd ask something like, what's your day-to-day like? And he'd just say, oh, it's always different. Keeps me on my toes. Still, I figured maybe he was just being cautious about sharing too much since, he was a cop. Fast forward a week, and Amanda sends me a link to a news article with a text that just says, isn't this the guy you went out with? I clicked the link, and there he was, Mike, staring back at me in a mugshot. Turns out, Mike had been fired from the police force a month before our date. Not only that, but he was under state and federal investigation for stalking, domestic violence, and illegally wiretapping his ex-girlfriend. I spent the next 24 hours convincing myself that I was not, in fact, cursed, but just very, very unlucky. The return to the hellscape. Which brings us to now. Against my better judgment, I let Amanda convince me to re-download Bumble. She said, you've just had bad luck. Lightning doesn't strike 3 times. Amanda was wrong again. I matched with this guy named Chris last week. His profile seemed normal. He worked in tech, he liked hiking, he had a golden retriever, red flag. Maybe? I thought, okay, let's give this one more shot. Chris and I started messaging, and everything seemed fine at first. He was funny, polite, and didn't send me any unsolicited shirtless pics, which, at this point, felt like a win. But then about 5 messages in, he hit me with, so, how do you feel about polyamory? Now, I'm not knocking polyamory, it's just not for me. So I told him as much, thinking that would be the end of the conversation. But Chris was not ready to let it go. He spent the next 20 minutes trying to convince me that monogamy was a social construct, and that I'd be happier and more fulfilled if I just gave polyamory a shot. When I politely declined, he said, well, it's your loss. Most women would kill to have a guy as emotionally evolved as me. I unmatched him immediately. Story 5. Here are some of my tidbits from over the years. One from Match.com had a bunch of face pics, extremely attractive, and said she's athletic, when in reality she was morbidly obese, probably 5 feet 5 inches, near 300 pounds. I still met up with her at Starbucks and spent a half hour chatting, then gave her a nice to meet you conclusion and never spoke with her again. A day later, she writes a psychotic, pissed off, 3-page email along the lines of, what's your fucking problem? Are you superficial about my weight, you asshole? WTF, Seriously, I never even said a word about it, even though she lied about her weight and body type. Another girl I met on Match was a hardcore alcoholic. Worst I've ever seen, and my dad was one. She was 10x worse. Drank straight vodka like any of us would drink water. She was constantly getting into fist fights, squatting and pissing everywhere during the date, and was so bad at the end of the first date that I felt like I had to babysit her. She was no longer able to walk, so I took her home and let her sleep in my bed. Then I took care of her the next morning, as you'd take care of a sick child. Since we originally drove and met at a mutual place, I couldn't take her back to her car to drive home that night due to her condition. Not as if it were much better the morning after. One girl I dated twice popped this line on me. Oh, I thought I should tell you this. Technically, I'm still considered married in Bermuda. I never spoke to her again, and she became a stalker lunatic, texting me 15x a day, no exaggeration, calling constantly and leaving messages for 2 weeks. Someone I dated for 3 months, of whom I was absolutely in love with, wound up having cheated on me the entire time with her douchebag drug addict ex from NYC. I have the biggest cheater/liar radar on earth, and she completely fooled me, and is still one of the few who were able to do so to this day. I found out after I started getting late-night prank calls from him while she laughed in the background, and both of them were high. Looks like she was also a druggie, which I never saw any signs of. I had to get a restraining order against both of them. I also reported him to the police as being a drug dealer. Kind of funny, during the second date with my ex from college, we went back to her house with her parents and found out that their house was robbed. Her father was a gigantic polished dude who was drunk on vodka all the time, and was really drunk at the time, so he threw a Hulk-like fit of rage on the sidewalk. He picked up a huge iron fence post and started smashing the pavement and some parked cars with it. The police came, and I pleaded with them to let him go. Turns out that at some point in between, he also ran down the block and put a few dents in cars with his fist. Dated someone from downtown NYC for over a month and a half, and we did absolutely nothing physical at all. It was very bizarre. Eventually she called me, crying, saying that the reason why is because she has herpes and didn't want me to catch it. I had an indescribable shock face on. I had no idea what to say, but I thanked her twice for saving me from catching it. We never spoke again. These are all reasons why I had to move out of New Jersey. Story 6. A girl invited me over to her house after maybe a week of intermittent OKC chatting to watch the Breaking Bad finale. We both liked the show, but on the way to her house, she lived maybe a 15-minute drive away. She chooses to confide in me that she's actually a drug dealer and that she hopes I'm okay with it. Now, I'm not a big druggie, maybe the most casual, once every couple months smoker at best, but I'm an open-minded person, so I said what the hell. I was already closer to her place than mine, and I wanted to see what was on Breaking Bad. I get there and a few things are some blatant signals that something's wrong, which I, in my laid-back naivety, chose to ignore. First off, she's about half a foot shorter than her listed profile height and maybe 20 lbs heavier. This was a problem because I'm already a tall man, so at this point we've got a nearly 2-foot height differential. Additionally, she's dressed in a shawl like a sort of suburban stoner vampirella, and the whole house is unheated, in November, mind you, and unlit, save for many, many candles. I could clearly tell that this wasn't going to work out, but still I soldiered on for a bit for the sake of Breaking Bad. I sit down on a couch, and she just disappears for roughly 10 minutes. I'm not about to turn on her television for fear of rudeness, and also because I'm not 100% sure that this house has power yet. After she returns, she has her dealer boss, for lack of a better term, with her, and with him perhaps the biggest bag of weed I've seen in my life. The two proceed to lay it out on the table and take out little baggies, building up smaller stores for sales or whatever. You can see my weed expertise is lacking. And this whole time the girl doesn't really talk to me at all. Her dealer boss and I have a polite conversation about various things, and honestly I was a bit surprised that they were displaying this whole operation to some guy she met on the internet. I must have one of those faces. I mentioned my Breaking Bad, my only hope of salvation, and they turned on a little television in the corner. The volume was low though, because apparently I was interrupting their business meeting with my quality television. Maybe 20 minutes in, they get a knock at the door, and in comes several other of their little dealer crew to help with their community harvest. Here I am, sitting on a couch in the corner, a fly on the wall, as 6 people just talk shop about drug dealing while bagging up little weed parcels for all the good little boys and girls. All this time the girl didn't really talk to me at all, and the other people made more polite small talk. After Breaking Bad, admittedly I missed a lot of the plot. I excused myself and left. A story from a friend of mine to add. I online date quite a bit, for I don't have the time or desire to go to a pub to meet women, and also it is a great tool for weeding out the crazies. One of my worst experiences was a few years ago, and really it isn't all that bad, however you may enjoy my tale. We met on Match.com, and hit it off in email pretty well with a few small warning signs that at the time seemed like general inquisitiveness. Signs like, what is your job? Does that pay well? In addition, her constant drive for acceptance, compliments, status, and her devout materialism. Being less cynical then than I am now. We set up a date and agree on a moderately fancy place in downtown Seattle. We set our date for 7, and I make reservations. When I arrive, 5 minutes early, she is already at the table and has 3 empty martini glasses before her and nursing her 4th. Her photos were not all that out of date and represented her, perhaps 10 pounds lighter, but they definitely were not up to date. She dressed to impress, but in my mind's eye, I recall something not being right about it all. Through the date, she kept trying to impress me about things she owned, places she had been, and name-dropping famous people she claimed to have known. Her continued emphasis on equating her worth to material things, and her continued inquiries about my worth, such as, do you rent, with a sneer, or do you own, were rapidly rising from warning to alarming. When it came time to order, she chose the most expensive thing on the menu, surf and turf with lobster, and ordered not 1, but 2 more Bombay Sapphire martinis, which she plowed through during the meal, while only touching 1 or 2 bites of her entire meal. I kept my end chit-chat small, and enjoyed my meal and paired wine, and let her continue her self-aggrandizement. For dessert, she ordered some $50 chocolate champagne truffle mousse and 2 more cocktails. I had coffee. I was beginning to grow concerned not just for my wallet, but also that she might actually be a pretty hardcore alcoholic. She had 2 bites of her dessert through the hour we talked and sent it off, like her meal, not requesting a doggy bag. As she siphoned off those 2 drinks, bringing her known total to 8 in 2.5 hours, I realized that there was something absolutely wrong with this person at a fundamental level, and getting any more involved with her would probably be a very, very bad idea. When the waiter appeared after the dessert, I said to him, "We will take the checks, please," with an emphasis on the S. On cue, she excused herself to the ladies' room. The waiter got my subtlety and promptly returned with 2 bill books and placed one on her setting, and I gave him my card. She remained in the bathroom until the waiter returned with my card and the receipt. As she came to the table complaining loudly about the bathroom, I bid her good evening and told her that I really wasn't interested in pursuing a relationship with her, but that I wished her the best of luck, and turned to walk to the door. About the time I got to the door, I heard her scream, "For $100. I am not paying this," and I walked out. I never heard from her again, and I hope she got the help that she needs. Also, I would like to add that since this date I moved from the Pacific Northwest to a suburb of Stockholm, Sweden. Where here in Sweden, at least on the first date, women always pay for themselves because regardless of gender, equality is equality. I kinda like this, and although I absolutely do not mind treating a date, I think that it sets an obligation-free atmosphere for a date that allows us to get to know one another without the specter of one person being beholden to another over a meal. So I met an insane woman on Match.com who decided to run up a $400 bill for her dinner and drinks, probably expecting me to pay for it. I paid my part and left her to hers. Later moved to Sweden, where women pay their own way. Story 7. About 4 years ago, reeling from a nasty breakup, I decided to give Match.com a try. A couple weeks after signing up, I received a message from a guy named Justin. He was cute and just my type, and we set up a date. We got along really well in person, and ended up going on a couple more dates. It seemed like everything was going well. Justin lived in Fullerton, and it was my turn to drive to him for a date. We headed over to Dave and Buster's, and had a great time playing air hockey and Dance Dance Revolution. Then we decided to head back to his place to watch a movie. We'd kissed a couple times, and Justin was an excellent kisser. I was looking forward to cuddling and more kissing. But first we decided to make a stop at 7-Eleven for some munchies. We gathered up a couple sodas and some candy, and took them up to the register. $6.66, said the cashier as I pulled out my wallet to pay. Justin gasped loudly. "We can't possibly leave the total at $6.66, he exclaimed. "That's the mark of the devil." I just laughed. Justin got a very serious look on his face. "If we leave the total like that, we're going to get in a car accident on the way home and die. At this point, I felt he was being ridiculous. Fine, grab something else if it bothers you that much. He threw a York peppermint patty on the counter and was satisfied when the total became $7.42. And we headed back to his place. After picking out a movie, we grabbed our bag of snacks and plopped down on his bed. I proceeded to take off my shoes and get comfortable. But Justin gasped again. "Oh, my God," he said. "Are those the socks with separate toes? Those really freak me out." I looked down at my striped toe socks. How could anyone be freaked out by something so goofy? "Seriously," he said, "I can't handle those socks. They really, really bother me." I just looked at him and leaned back on the bed. I was already over it. Little did I know Justin was just getting started. "Oh my God," he exclaimed. I could see that a light had just gone off inside his head. "I get it now. You're a witch. It all makes sense." "Come again?" I asked. "It all makes sense. Your black cat, your love of bats, your stripy witch socks, and you weren't even bothered by the $6.66. Are you a witch?" "Get real," I said. "I'm not a fucking witch." But I could see the guy was serious. "Retard." "Well, I think you're a witch," he said. "And can you please take off your socks? They're really bothering me." "I'm not taking off my damn socks," I replied. "You're being silly." "I can't help it. Those socks really freak me out. I'll do anything for you to take them off. I'll pay you to take them off. Any amount. You'll pay me?" I asked. "Yes," came his reply. "Fine. Pay me $6.66. He glared at me as I packed up my stuff and left. And that was the last I ever saw of Justin. Guy I was dating seriously thought I was a witch. Story 8. This is most likely going to get buried. Here goes. Hopefully it will give someone else a giggle, as my friends regularly remove the urine from me about it. So after a particularly bad breakup, I decide to give internet dating a shot. So egged on by a couple of friends, I decide to join Plenty of Fish. It's free, nothing to lose. I join up, don't really send any messages, look around every now and then when... Bingo! I get my first message. Very polite girl. Attractive, seems smart, has job. All boxes ticked so far. We chat for a fair while, when she springs the trap and asks to meet. I agree, and drive around 45 minutes to the arse end of nowhere to meet her. No biggie, I like driving. I get to this pub, drop her a text and just say, "Hey, I'm here a little early, shall I grab you a drink?" I wait 5 minutes, no reply, no sweat. I got myself a beer and opened a tab to make life a little easier. So there I am, sitting, nothing for at least 25 minutes. So I'm thinking on calling it quits, finish my beer, look at my phone, nothing. I'm grabbing my coat, when all of a sudden, she appears. She apologizes. I half expect her to say that her car broke down, or bus was late, something akin to this. Oh no, no, no. She was over the other side of said pub, with her friends. Right. That's pretty weird, but whatever, she's here now, no point in dwelling. So we start chatting. I buy her a large glass of wine. She lives walking distance to the pub. After about 15 minutes of fairly open conversation, she starts telling me about how she owns her own house and has a friend living with her, whom gets drunk often and like to vom all over the place. Lovely. However, this kind of dominated all the conversation for the best part of an hour, all the while she keeps those large wines coming, on tab. Eventually, the buck stops and she looks at me completely fuck-eyed. She can't even sit up straight without propping herself. At this point, I decide that this woman is the devil. I make some quick excuses about work, etc., etc. Then I realize that she can't actually stand up. I ask her if I can drive her home. In fact, I was rather insistent on this, as the girl would most likely have ended up laying in the middle of the road if left to her own device. She finally agrees with the condition of no sex. Don't worry, darling. That's at the end of my wish list with you right now. So I take her to my car, open the door for her, and she falls in. It's hard to graciously explain what I mean here. She is literally sitting in the footwell, looking up at me as if I tripped her. I can't even be bothered anymore. I close the door, walk around, and start the longest short trip in history. She's giving me dumb shit directions. Right on the roundabout. It's a fucking one-way street, etc., etc. Anyway, I'm driving. By this time she is now sitting in the seat. She looks to me and says, "You're a wanker." I know this. You have a nice car. You must be a wanker. I have a relatively nice car which I have worked hard for. I don't even answer her. We finally, after multiple wrong turns, get to her house. I say, "Thanks for the enlightening afternoon." Yup, wasn't even an evening date. She doesn't say a word, stumbles out of the car, slams the door. I drive away with yet another dent to my self-confidence. Another one of mine, which was the worst date ever. I was forced to leave my house for the evening due to a halfway down tree aimed at my house, and I put a message out on FB about the issues. An acquaintance of mine immediately texts me and offers to take out for dinner, drinks, and a concert to cheer me up. He'd been asking me out for weeks, and I really wasn't that interested, but I appreciated him trying to help me take my mind off of possible having a tree on my house the next morning. So I went. Dinner and drinks were fine, and conversation was okay. We just didn't have much in common. We go to the concert, and I know a lot of people there because it's a small town. That's when things start getting weird. I started talking to a group of my friends and introduce him. He doesn't say a word and stands behind me the entire time staring at me, as if he can only talk to me. I try to start up a conversation, and he gives me one-word answers and doesn't have anything to say. So we go to the dance floor of the concert. I tell him I want to dance and says he doesn't dance. Sits down and just stares at me. So I try to dance a little, but I can't with him just staring at me. I ask him if he wants to leave. I give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he just really hates dancing. And we decided to go get another drink. My friends text me about a party and I ask him if he'd like to go, and he says the dreaded line, "Whatever you want to do, hell yeah. You're starting to weird me out. Let's go be around other people I trust." We show up at my friend's party, and he once again refuses to say a word to any of my friends and follows me around not really talking to me either. I decide Eve had enough trying to coax him out of his shell and get to know him, hoping he will find someone else he relates to. I start talking to a group of my girlfriends, and we play a card game. He comes up to me, asks me for my keys. I had been driving us around, thinking he just needed to grab something. An hour or so goes by, and I've completely forgotten about him. I get my phone out to call him, hoping he hadn't stolen my car, and find 4 to 5 text messages on my phone. It's him. Apparently, he had been sitting in my car the whole time texting me, and I didn't realize. He states how angry he is that I'm not talking to him, and I've been ignoring him all night. He accuses me of flirting with other guys, even though I've been talking to my GFs all night, and I am just using him for a free concert, even though he had been begging me to go out with him for weeks. I go out to my car and am pretty livid that he's been sitting in my car, sending me ridiculous text messages, accusing me of ignoring him, even though he's been sitting in my car for an hour. He gets angry and walks home. It wasn't that far, so I didn't feel very bad considering. The next day I find that he's deleted me from FB and sent a flurry of Facebook messages calling me a bitch and telling me how horrible of a person I am, then apologizes and tries to add me again. Did not accept. Haven't spoken to him since, thankfully. Story 9. This is kinda long, but I think it's worth the read. Several years ago I was playing World of Warcraft and was just having friendly banter in guild chat. One of the guild members that I had never met commented on the conversation, and we began to talk. I paid it little mind, but had an interesting conversation nonetheless. We talked a bit more the next day, and she said she was a girl and lived in the part of the world where I had grown up and where my parents still lived. Again, paid it little mind and minded my own business. Over the course of a few weeks, we actually started to form a pretty strong friendship. We would do things together in game and have conversations over Ventrilo and eventually even over the phone. I still didn't take things seriously at all, even when we started telling each other bedtime stories. After a few months, I started to really consider her a good friend. Our conversations were often rather deep, and she seemed genuinely interesting to talk to, a quality I found lacking with most of the women I came in contact with. About 4 months after we started talking, a very dear friend of mine, who was in the Navy, called me up and said that he was going back home, where I was from, where she lived, and wanted to see me. He bought me a ticket and insisted that I come visit him, so I did. I made a point to let her know that I would be there, and I would like to meet her. Long story short, I went to meet her, and we really seemed to hit it off. We even made a lot of our bedtime stories come to life. A few days later I got a motel room, and we had another incredible night. I went back home, halfway across the country, after my vacation, and I just couldn't seem to get her out of my head. I ended up coming to this point where I realized I had a choice. A huge fork in the road, and no matter which path I took, I would always wonder what would have happened if I had taken the other path. I decided to throw caution to the wind and pursue love. Anyway, the next 2 years of my life were kinda living hell. We had financial problems, legal issues, complicated, not getting into details, More money problems, loss of jobs, loss of house, lots and lots of moving. But I stood by her side the entire time and she stood by mine. We've been together just over 4 years now, and we have a beautiful baby boy who melts my heart every time he looks at me. We've been through some incredibly tough times together, but we've come out smelling like a rose. We're actually about to buy a house together and really settle down. I had to add this here to remind everybody that not every online relationship is a horror story. Sometimes taking a risk can really turn out for the better. Story 10. Met a cute girl named Dana on OkCupid in 2009 around northern Indiana. We hit it off online, we were both into similar things, and she seemed fun. Not exactly the brightest, but fun. We shot messages back and forth for about a week. We were both in college at the time, and she lived pretty far away, but I decided to meet her for a first date and see how things go. I drive the 50 minutes to her house to pick her up. As I walk to the front door, I notice a pink Power Wheels and trampoline on the front lawn. Looking back on this from a distance of many years, I should have stopped right there, turned around, gotten in my car, and driven back home. But I hadn't gotten laid in a long time, so my brain was tuning out any and all such red flags. Undaunted by the obvious warning signs, I ring the doorbell. A 12-year-old boy answers. "Who are you?" he asks me in a thick drawl. Before I can answer, his younger sister of about 7 runs up behind him yelling, "It's Dana's internet boyfriend." From the couch in front of the living room TV, displaying a riveting NASCAR race, comes the voice of what I can only assume was a large, middle-aged man who had to be her dad. "Danner, your date's here." No hello. No handshake. He didn't even get off the couch. And just for clarification's sake, the whole family had such a thick drawl that Dana became Dana, sort of like idea becomes idea. Around the corner comes running a rotund woman in a baggy WVU sweatshirt and baggy jeans. She shoos her siblings away and runs out the door, closing it behind her. As I get a good close look at her there on the doorstep, my mind is desperately trying to match her face and figure to the pictures online. Like I said, my long-time lack of sex had been affecting my judgment, and it showed nowhere worse than in my appraisal of what she would look like in person. In those first few seconds of conversation, I was on autopilot, blurting out perfunctory haze and how's it goings, while a broiling fury of self-condemnation raged in my head. Damn you, penis, for making me ignore the obvious high-angled self-shots and pictures from the titties up. You intentionally disregarded all the classic warning signs of a fat chick trying to hide her fatness. God damn it. But her rack is pretty huge if you can see its contours even underneath that big hoodie. No. Shut up, penis. Not being a total asshole, I kept my cool and decided to at least show her a good time. We went off to some random local Mexican place. Her choice. I had no idea where anything was in this town. The rest of the date was pretty standard. Food, conversation, laughs. A visit to the park playground cause there wasn't shit else to do in this podunk place besides go bowling, and fuck that unless I'm completely wasted. Finally I drop her back off at her house. Say I had a great time, but don't know how things will pan out cause we live so far away. Give her a good night kiss and drive home. Here's where shit gets hilarious. 20 minutes into my journey back I get a text from her that reads, "Hey, I just want to know, are you a player? Do you use girls for your own pleasure?" I text back, what? Reply, well, I am just trying to find out if you will take this serious. I don't want to scare you off, but I want to make sure we are on the same page. I say, look, we've been talking for a week and have only known each other in person for all of 3 hours. There's nothing to take serious. Let's just have fun and see where it goes. I have absolutely no intention of seeing where anything goes, but I want to let her down easy. Nonetheless, the crazy is unleashed without me even having to let her down. She doesn't text me back after that, so I think, hey, she got the message and calmed down. I get home around 10:30 p.m. It's Friday. It's college. My roommates and I end up going out and getting shit-faced. I pass out at our friend's house, but had left my phone in my room. When I get home the next afternoon, I grab my phone and see that I have 18 missed calls, 42 text messages, and 7 picture messages. All from the same girl. What? The flying fuck. I won't list the entire smorgasbord of desperation, but it went something like this. 11:12, hey, 11:34, hey, what are you doing? 11:50, I miss you. 12:01, are you mad at me? 12:10, why aren't you answering? 1 o'clock, I knew you were a player. 1:21, damn it, please talk to me. 219, I'm sorry I called you a player. 233 picture MSG of her laying on her bed in bra and panties. 234, what you are missing right now. 3 o'clock pic MSG of her lifting her breast to her mouth and licking it. 301, I want you so bad right now. 345, come over. 357, my parents are gone, I'll be just us. 1049, hey. 11:15 pic MSG one arm cradling her boobs over the nipples. 11:16, let's hang out tonight, winking and laughing, etc., etc., and on and on and on. Needless to say, I never texted her back. My friends and I had a good laugh about the whole situation, the ridiculous text messages, how I dodged a crazy bullet. But the damnedest thing is, over the course of the next few years, I would still randomly get a "Habe" from her every couple months. Like she thought that I would forget how bats hit insane she is if she just gave it a few months to simmer down. Okay Cupid, never again. She did have some great tits though. Story 11. I've gotten into 2 serious, long-term relationships with guys I've met on online dating sites. 2.5 years with the current one, and going strong. I did go on a 24-hour-long date with one guy, which should have been about 6 different dates. Actually, it never would have gone Bay one date if I'd gotten out of the car when I should have. That was about the point. He said he hated gay people, and surely you don't believe in that monkey shit. Atheist in the house. Anyway, on this one date we went mini-golfing, played pool/arcade games, went for lunch, I met his mom, he took me to the top of one hill in the city I'd never been to before, then to his high school to teach me how to play his professional sport, frisbee golf, then to the top of the other big hill in town, then back to meet his mom a second time and show me his room, dinner, movies. At least I made him sit through New Moon. Supermarket for wine, my place for strip poker. One thing led to the other and he stayed the night. During the frisky times, he asked me 3 questions a man should never ask a girl, especially when it's the worst sex she's ever had. Will you be my girlfriend? Is it big enough for you? Have you come yet? The answer to all 3 should have been a resounding no. Anyway, then breakfast the next morning, and then he wanted to take me to an engagement party as his girlfriend. But I made my excuses and said I had a friend in dire need of my help. Ended it all the next day, citing irreconcilable differences. He was gutted. The whole time we were out together he kept saying, "Where did you come from?" All this because my now boyfriend of 2.5 years disappeared, standing me up. All before we were officially a thing, of course. Don't go out on really long dates with people you actually have nothing in common with, and are a seriously shitty lay just because you're mad at the guy you really liked and had a few dates with for standing you up and disappearing for a couple of weeks. A friend of mine's story to add. Went on a date with a girl I met through OkCupid. We met at a local bar for a couple drinks. This sounds really pompous, but I could tell just by speaking with her that I was out of her league. Way above her, in fact. She was working at a bookstore, didn't seem well educated, and was just generally devoid of long-term goals and motivation. However, I definitely would have slept with her if given the opportunity. I decided that I would entertain her for an evening, buy her some drinks, and see where it went. She was very pleasant and cheery, and the conversation was fluid. As the night wound to a close, she said she had to get up for work in the morning. We walked outside the bar, and I received a nice kiss, tongue and all. She declined me to walk her home because she didn't want to be tempted to invite me in. Okay. We texted sporadically through the week about our work days and other trivial things. She mentioned one evening after work that she was feeling exhausted and could really go for a massage. I, being the gentleman I am, offered my amateur services. She said I should meet her at her place at 9 p.m. Done deal. Walked to her house, and she invited me in. I asked what she wanted to do, suggesting TV or a movie. She replied that she didn't have a TV. Okay. I wasn't sure what else you do at a stranger's house that doesn't have a TV other than give them a massage. She gives me a tour of her home, which ends at her bedroom. This is basically a script from the movies at this point. Knowing my role, I sit on her bed. She comes into the bedroom and locks the door behind her. I thought to myself that this was suddenly a different kind of movie, and I definitely wasn't sure what kind. She kneels on her bed and faces away from me, pulling her shirt off. I couldn't see anything, but I liked my odds at this point. She lays down on the bed and hands me a body butter bar. I rub up my hands and go to work on her shoulders. Great skin. Nice body. I'm working on this girl's back until my hands are sore. She senses this and kills the light on the nightstand. All right. She invites me to climb under the covers with her. I quickly pull off my jeans and slip under with her. We make out for a minute or two before I go in for second base. She is, after all, in bed with me and her shirt is off. She senses what is happening and slaps my hand away. What? I try again, and she forcibly puts my hands back on my side of the bed. I'm dumbfounded. You didn't think I was going to have sex with you, did you? This is a joke, I think to myself. The look on her face did not indicate as such. I look at her and very matter-of-factly state, yes, I was very much of the opinion that we would be having sex this evening. She arches her eyebrows and recoils. I barely know you. I can't believe that you would think that. How dare you? After all that rubbing, the kissing, the shirt coming off, the invitation to come over for a massage. She doesn't even have a TV. She put her shirt on under the covers and turned over, the cold shoulder. I got up and left without so much as a word. Never heard from her again. Story 12. Seeing a running pattern with the heterosexual male posts on here of met her, and she turned out to be a fatty, so I ran. So I thought I'd share some of my psycho-host beast dates with girls/women, which had nothing to do with their weight. Date from hell, one hipster vegan chick. I told her up front I don't like a lot of indie alternative music and that I eat meat. She said she didn't care, everyone can do what they want. I still didn't feel right about it, but went along on the date anyway. We meet at Casino El Camino, which if you live in Austin, you know the place. I ordered one of their amazing cheeseburgers. She started going on a tirade about how meat is processed and how the cows are treated, and basically trying to gross me out using crap borrowed from Fast Food Nation. I know exactly where meat comes from, and so it doesn't faze me a bit. I start telling her a few things she's missing in how livestock is treated, what free range actually means, for example. I'm trying to show her that I understand her point of view, but that I still eat meat, even saying something to that effect. But she will not shut up. Finally, my burger comes. I realize this date is pretty much done, so I decide to send it off with a bank. I bite into my casino burger. It's so juicy and bloody. Oh, I love ground up animal flesh. The torture makes it taste so much better. She kept trying to gross me out, and when she realized it wasn't working, and I kept egging her on the whole time talking about how the pain and suffering made the meat sweeter and stuff like that, she threw her drink on me and left. Had a blast, but that jacket still smells faintly of PBR 3 years later. Date from hell 2. Meet a girl online. She's one of those fake goth girls. Basically, when Marilyn Manson was popular, they bought their entire wardrobe from Hot Topic, but mention Skinny Puppy or Bauhaus to them, and you get blank stares. Anyway, we meet at Waffle House, her choice, not mine, and she's wearing a very low-cut shirt that shows off her vast tracts of land, and she has an almost foot-long ink tattooed on her cleavage. Thinking I have a topic of conversation finally, I say, they did nice work on that ink tattoo. When did? It's not an ankh, it's a vampire cross. That's an ankh. The Egyptian hieroglyph for life. It's associated with vampires because it's not an ankh, it's a vampire cross. I left quickly. Date from hell 3. Valentine's Day is the single SAP stream day. Almost every single girl in the country feels horrible if they don't have a date, so they'll say yes to anyone who asks them out. So I met a girl online, and she came over to my place and talked for several hours, watched Princess Bride, talked about books, had some non-intercourse sexy times. I loaned her a book she seemed interested in because I thought we were hitting it off, and she left. Next day, I'm headed to work when I see my book laying on my doorstep with a paper crammed in it. It's a 3-page long letter in which she goes on and on about how big of a loser I am, how she only went out with me because she didn't want to be alone on Valentine's Day, how pathetic I am, how childish because I like movies like Princess Bride, how I need to come out of the closet, how stupid I am since I never finished college, and I'm obviously a complete idiot, etc. Note that not once in the entire evening did she give any indication she wasn't interested. I even went over a play-by-play with a female friend to make sure I didn't miss anything, and she's always good about pointing them out to me. So I wrote her back even though she told me never to contact her again, explaining in thorough detail exactly how she was being a bitch. I also included a copy of her letter, which I proofread for grammar, spelling, and punctuation errors. Date from hell 4. Talked about this one in another post recently, but I was talking to a girl online. She asked what plans I had that night. I said I was going to see my friend's punk band. She said she'd love to go. I warned her it was punk music, and she may not like it. She said she wanted to go anyway. So we meet, and we're talking, and I reiterate it's a punk band as in 70s style punk, not Green Day or some 41. She says, I love punk music, it's all I listened to in high school. Everyone else listed to that stupid rap nigger music. At this time, my friend who was the drummer for the band that had 3 songs about racial unity in the punk scene and their fondness for beating the shit out of racist/Nazi skinheads and punks shows up. He's also over 6 tall and black with a huge afro. So this is my friend I was talking about. Date from hell. Like many atheists, I'm fascinated by theology. I have a shelf of various religious books in my library. Girl comes over, have drinks, she smokes 2 bowls, but I decline because it's not my thing. Blah blah, sexy times. Afterward, she starts looking over my bookshelf, talking about how much she loves Harry Potter after seeing I have them, and asking about some of the other series like Dresden Files I have. Then she notices I have the Satanic Bible, and starts screaming that I'm evil. I point out that I have 2 books on Satanism, 5 on Wicca, 10 on Christianity, including for different translations of the Bible, 2 on Buddhism, etc. Doesn't matter, I'm an evil Satanist, and I'm going to hell. Please note the following. She knew I was an atheist. We'd talked about it several times. She was intoxicated, doing drugs, engaged in premarital sex with me, had bragged earlier about her lesbian encounters. But owning a book is what's evil. Date from hell 6. She comes over to my place. I cook us dinner. She calls her dealer, who comes over with 3 guys who look like leg breakers, so she can buy an 8-ball of Coke, then argues with the guy aggressively over the price. WTF? Date from hell 7. I have 3 go-to-movies for dates who come over to my place to watch a movie. I of course let them look over my DVD collection and choose whatever they want, but if they ask me to pick, I pick one of these 3 movies: Stardust, Princess Bride, and Casablanca. They're all romantic movies, but also very good movies. So we're watching Casablanca. She's quiet through the entire film. Movie ends, she's still quiet. I ask her what she thought of it. It was good, but why did they have to make the Germans so mean? Story 13. I met this girl on OkCupid, and honestly wasn't that physically attracted to her. She seemed quite interested in me, and I hate how I got shut down from possible dates because I'm not the best looking guy around, so I decided to give this date a shot. Firstly, she lived way away from me, and in a maze of a residential area. I pulled up to her rundown trailer and thought to myself, no problem, Ace. You once lived in a trailer too, you know. So I stepped out and walked up the dirt driveway to the front door and knocked. I hear a voice from the other side of the house letting me know that they do not use the front door and to come in the side sliding glass door. I head on over and take a step inside, and the next thing I know my senses are under attack. My ears are being pierced by what sounds like hundreds of screaming babies. My nose is being assaulted by whatever the hell the mother was cooking. My eyes couldn't focus on one thing because of all the skittering of cockroaches everywhere. I took a deep breath and decided to muddle on through. I went back to the girl's room, let's call her Lisa, and sat while she continued to get ready. After Lisa was ready, we started to head out when I hear her mother call to me. Hey, you think you could pick up some sugar while you're out? I let out a groan in my mind, then turned to her with a smile. Sure. No problem. I kinda expected her to give me money for this, but she turned around and returned her attention to what I can only assume was the bubonic plague in edible form. Lisa and I disembarked and managed to navigate the maze successfully and went to a local store. Picked up the sugar, then went on our date. We went to see some absolutely terrible horror movie because that was what she wanted to see. In the theater, it was obvious she was wanting me to make moves on her, but I simply wasn't interested, and we had only had about 8 words with each other prior to the movie. After the movie, I took her back to her place, and she sat in my car awkwardly waiting for me to bust a move. When I didn't, she said, "Okay, well, I don't kiss on the first date, but how about a hug?" I made an awkward smile and nodded. The hug couldn't have been more unnatural, and she stepped out. As I'm arguing with my GPS trying to get back home, I receive a few texts from her, asking how I felt the date went, and then informing me that she thinks I could be the one to bring her back to guys. I arched a brow at that last message and asked what she meant. She told me that she was a lesbian up until that date and was hoping that I could put back on the straight path. It all started to make sense. The fact that her hair was shorter than mine, her general masculinity that made me feel like the lady on the date, even though everything was coming from my wallet. I texted her back and said that the date was fine, but that I doubt I was manly enough to bring her back to men. She assured me that I was wrong and continued to text me for a few weeks afterwards, even though I had long stopped responding. In the end, she was a nice girl, but just not my type. Story 14. Oh good God, this guy. I met him when I was in junior high online. Just randomly messaged him off a list of screen names I'd found for fun. He was a year younger than me, and we talked and role-played on a forum for 2 years. He disappeared at the start of high school and reappeared by senior year, just before graduation. We talked about the old days, and it escalated from there. I live in California. He lived in Maryland. He was a possessive, manipulative boy who had dropped out of high school and just played World of Warcraft all day. He roped me into playing, and that is how I now have an account, server transferred. He would refuse to admit to his friends that we were dating, and often tell me he just didn't want people in his business. He talked me into selling my things, first semester of college ever, to pay for a plane ticket to visit him over Christmas. I visited him twice a year, every year for 3 years, his antics being guilting me into sex, having me fly 3,000 miles to Maryland to just sit around his awful smelling room to play World of Warcraft. Play UGIO at all hours of the night. Sleep until 6 in the evening, leaving me alone. Try to follow me into the bathroom when I showered, often argued/yelled at me, and would mope when I disagreed. His parents were alcoholics and drank every night at a bar, leaving me to babysit their 12-year-old and amuse their high school dropout son. One summer, rumors flew that he'd been fucking a girl that had been hanging out with them. This girl threatened to kick my ass, kill me, etc. because she was so gangster, and I had told her that she's a whore and has no merit on my list of concerns. She never showed up while I was there, but this bastard dumped me. Right there in the middle of a 4-week visit, and I AHD to drop hundreds of dollars to fly home last minute. He would argue with me until I was worn down and admitted defeat, and often blamed me for his problems. He hated not being the center of attention, and would drive away friends I made. I never felt like a person, and from being blamed for his woes, I have not regained my self-respect. I literally felt like he needed me around, as he had trained me to think, and was afraid to break things off. We have not spoken for a year. The final straw was his constant stalking of my DeviantArt and WoW accounts, and my last visit resulted in me leaving early. After 2 days, when he continued to scream at me for having made a friend a few hours from where I lived, and considering attending the college he'd showed me around, he went through my phone and tried to physically keep me from leaving his house with my suitcase. The last I heard, he'd roped another girl into transferring to his server, and she was having the same problems as I had, but won't listen to a mutual friend about his bullshit. Sucks to be her. Story 15. Well, I have 2 horror stories and 1 happy ending. The first horror story was a guy I went out with about 3 times, and casually mentioned that I had a blog and played an MMO. He signed up for the MMO, and we started playing together, but didn't hang out again face to face because I had to go out of town for work. A few weeks into it, I noticed that he was online in the game, power leveling and stuff without me. I didn't think anything of it, but I said, "Hey, I saw you online last night. What did you wind up doing? Any new content?" And he denied it. This happened a few times, and he would always deny it, even though his level was getting higher and higher, and I could see him online, plain as day. I thought it was a dumb thing to lie about, and an even dumber thing to fight about, so I stopped messaging him. About that same time, I started getting really vindictive, nasty comments on my blog. They said things that didn't really make sense, like they were coming from someone who knew a little about me, but not enough to really zing it, so they filled in the cracks with made-up guesswork. It didn't take long for me to fill in the blanks and realize it was this guy. I turned off the comments feature on my blog, and he started texting me and calling me. Non-stop. Finally, I changed my number, my blog address, and any other digital information I could. I'm really glad that fucker never knew where I lived. The other, I've written about a couple times on various other Ask Reddit threads. I met a guy on a dating site. We usually hung out one-on-one, but he met my friends occasionally. He was always really sweet to me in private and pretty cool around my friends. It got to the point where I wanted more, so I said as much, and he went off on me, saying my weight was disgusting. I weighed about 60 pounds less than he did, and was only a few inches shorter than he, so he wasn't exactly thin himself, and I was gross and stupid. He would text, call, email, and Facebook me periodically to remind me that he felt that way. I just forwarded all of his bile to his new girlfriend, including the parts where he mentions being interested in cheating on her. But my happy ending came about a year ago, when I went on a date with my current boyfriend. We met on OkCupid, and after 2 weeks of texting decided to meet for pizza. I took a cab because after those 2 negative experiences, I didn't want my car to be seen, even though I knew several of his coworkers personally. It was raining, and he accidentally left the headlights on in his car. We talked for hours, so when we came out, he had a dead battery. He called his sister, who came with jumper cables, and said here, and went inside to play pool. So I stood in the rain with him and helped him jump his car. Then he said, "Would you like to hang out for a while longer? I live right around the corner. Least I could do is offer you a towel." So I decided to go back with him. I wound up going back to his house and watching Aladdin with him, of all things, and doing some pretty heavy making out. He drove me back to my neighborhood and said, "Not that horrible kiss of death, I'll call you. But so, how long do I have to wait to see you again?" Then he kissed the fuck out of me. A week later, we were Facebook official, and almost a year later, we're still together. Story 16. I had a comically, cascadingly bad date once. It eventually got funny. Eventually. Was living in a smallish town where if you wanted to date, well, beggars can't be choosers. I was set up with this hockey bro who was pretty popular in town, but God, I can't comprehend why. It was basically like talking to Ryan Lochte, and I wasn't any better. I had just read a really good book on the Vietnam War and raved about it, chapter by chapter, for the duration of our second date. Ugh, cringe. He could not have been any more bored. So yes, here we were, two people who wanted things to work out, but goddamn were we ever oil and water. One night we drove into the city. I thought tonight's the night, so I wore a bra that was pretty but massively uncomfortable. We're at a restaurant. I am totally changing my game and letting him do all the talking, what there was of it, and basically just fawned over him all night. I leaned forward, felt a sharp twinge, but ignored it. Eventually my side felt cold, and I noticed his sentences getting even more slower, amazingly enough, and him just looking very awkward. 15 minutes later a server comes up to me saying, "Oh my God, are you okay?" I look down, and the right side of my blouse is seeping with blood. Hockey bro had just watched in awkward silence for however long as strips of blood formed around his date's ribcage, and didn't say one word. The underwire of this motherfucking expensive bra snapped at such an angle that it pierced my skin. It didn't hurt, but just bled like the dickens. I have no idea how it drew the amount of blood that it did. It looked like I had been knifed. I kept laughing it off, and was making jokes, desperately hoping someone would laugh along. Nope. Just horrified, awkward stares. I had to take the underwire out in the bathroom, so I exited the restaurant with clumps of bloody paper towels and two very differently supported boobs. I'm a keeper. Hockey bro drives me to the medical center, says he's parking the car, and never comes back. Seriously. He abandoned me in a different city, 11 p.m. at night. He later said he came back but couldn't find me in the waiting room. Bullshit, buddy. So a few hours later, I'm bandaged up after a whopping 1 stitch. Didn't own a cell phone, so I'm in the waiting room by the payphone flipping through the white pages, wondering who on earth am I going to call. Still in my bloody shirt with injured people giving me weirded outside glances. And this guy offers to let me use Google Maps on his smartphone. I had one friend in the city, and I knew where she lived from visiting before, but I didn't know her number offhand. So I was just hoping she'd let me crash at her place for the night. I write down the Google Maps route, and I run out to catch the last bus of the evening. I catch it, fortunately. Thank God I had changed that night, I never do. And I get off at the right stop and walk the rest of the way. It's in the suburbs on the edge of the city. So I'm walking, all the streets look safe. But then the streetlights appear less and less, and suddenly I'm really at the edge of the urbanized city. What I didn't know beforehand was that Google Maps will use trails and pathways and all kinds of nature's little shortcuts as a route option. So here I am at like 1 a.m. walking through this pitch-black hiking trail through the woods, and we're talking about a relatively underdeveloped part of Canada, with just the moon, the stars, and surprisingly bright white plain contrails for light, hyperventilating thinking, this is how women get murdered. This is how women get murdered. I had a pen out for protection, using my other hand to cup my boob, because for me it hurts a bit when it's not supported. I have never in all my life been more alert and tense until that walk. I see some lights in the distance, and that's when I notice all the jackrabbits. There are tons and tons of jackrabbits, and I immediately get 10 times more nervous because where there's jackrabbits, there's coyotes. And right when I thought coyote, I heard a whine, about 15 feet away from me in the brush. I knew that there were houses under the hills, but that whine sure as fuck sounded right there. It was so comical. The timing was movie perfect. I immediately sprint like a bat out of hell towards the lights. And I'm no runner, so my wee little heart is just giving her. I broke through the trees, and up ahead amid darkened auto shop buildings and industrial factories was the beaming glow of a 24-hour Tim Hortons. And then it was funny. All of it, the whole night, was just hysterical to me. I stumbled inside, The poor cashiers just blinked at me. I looked like I had been assaulted and left for dead. I straightened myself out, told the story, and we all had a good laugh. I ended up staying most of the night, sipping hot chocolate, totally unwilling to go outside again. One of the girls hung out with me on her break, and we got chummy, both being the same age and both sort of depressed about fucking up our lives and feeling apathetic about our futures. And in the morning she and her mom drove me all the way back to my town. Motherfucking hockey brothers. Story 17. This guy asks me out to a student graduation recital at a music academy. He didn't know the student, but the performance is open to the public, although is usually attended by mostly family and friends. And it seemed like a creative date idea, so I said yes. Despite there being a small crowd of people mostly sitting in the front, he insists we sit up on the side balcony of the auditorium by ourselves. Once the recital starts, he wants to play a weird game involving counting the number of people in the audience and comparing numbers. He then starts talking about how he's really into chakras and explains that each day of the week has a different color and chakra associated with it. He goes on to say how Tuesday's chakra color was green and Wednesday's was blue. And since I was wearing green and he was wearing blue and it was a Tuesday night, our chakras would fuse together at midnight. He then proceeds to pull a handful of colored stones out of his back pocket, explains that he ordered these chakra stones online, and that they were warm because he had been directing all of his energy into them all night. He asked me if I wanted to hold them, while I politely declined and started thinking of escape strategies in my head. After the concert, when the student is surrounded by family, friends, and faculty, getting congratulated and taking pictures, he pushes his way to her, interrupts the photos, and gives the student a big hug and kiss on the cheek, and starts talking to her. She's staring at him with the most uncomfortable look to her face, and the circle of people around here are all whispering about who this guy was, and why was he here, while I stood at a slight distance, trying to signal him that we should leave. We finally leave, and against my better judgment, I went for a drink with him after the concert. He refused to let me order a beer for myself, and insisted we share this giant, blue, fruity monstrosity of a cocktail. After I tell him my favorite band is Imagine Dragons, he says that we should close our eyes, hold hands, and imagine dragons in our minds for 20 seconds. I'm too baffled to say anything or resist as he grabs my hands at this point, but I keep my eyes open, sure he's trying to pull a move here and go in for a kiss. To my surprise, he keeps his eyes closed, and after 20 seconds describes, in significant detail, a purple dragon flying over mountainside as we rode on its back. After many attempts to wrap up the night, we finally get the check, and he wants to split it. Normally, I'm all for splitting the bill, or paying for drinks if the guy paid for dinner, etc., but after he refused to let me get my own choice of drink, I was a little pissed off. He caps off the evening by asking me if I wanted to go to the Science Museum with him and his dad that weekend. After I mumble some excuse about needing to check my schedule because I had to work, he then says that while I'm a nice girl, he doesn't feel a connection with me and thinks we shouldn't see each other anymore. Story 18. I was on one of those fabulous dating apps. Was chatting with a guy and figured it would be smart just grabbing a coffee sooner than later to see if he was more vital than those pictures made him seem. On his profile he'd stated that he lived in a town an hour from me, but I asked if we couldn't get together in my hometown due to me traveling a lot for work, just not to his town. Cue the date, which he himself set the time for. It starts with him being 15 minutes late, walking from a direction that is not close to trains or buses. Turns out he lives in walking distance from our meeting point. He had had the day off, so he had not bothered to shower, dress in fresh clothes, or even comb his hair. I almost turned around and walked away, then scolded myself for being shallow, and I have to give guys the benefit of the doubt. I can't judge a guy for walking with slouched shoulders, an old cap, and an unwashed hoodie, can I? And the really poorly matched shorts, socks pulled up, and if I remember correctly, sandals? He lives downtown, but asks me which coffee house to go to. I don't even drink coffee, which he knew, so it really doesn't matter to me. As he's taking zero initiative, I suggest one close by. Order myself a hot cocoa and pay for it myself. No gesture, nothing, not a big no-no, but not adding to the low score he was heading towards. You know the dump now and don't look back to dateable, to wow, marry me now scale. We take a seat, which I had to locate for us. I had to ask questions and questions and questions to try to pretend we were having a conversation. He kept looking down at the table. Then suddenly he actually speaks first. I was by this time wondering how quickly I could down my cocoa and get out of there. Then it begins. What his ex said did, that she calls him, but that he doesn't really like her. Oh. So why are you sitting here telling me this? Previously I couldn't get him talking regardless of all my efforts, and now I couldn't shut him up. I, who cannot drink my drinks too hot, almost burned my tongue drinking my cocoa, started to look at my watch. Looked at my phone, and explained I just had to get out of there. He did contact me again. Explained that he had had a lovely time, and Rhea Ailey wanted to see me again. Do I have to add that it takes a lot more than a few messages for me to even go grab a coffee nowadays? Story 19. So I met this guy, I honestly can't remember where, and we went out on a Friday night. We met at the restaurant, and he was so incredibly rude to all the servers. That was my first big red flag. It was just generally a miserable dinner. I was young and naive, but I didn't want to be rude to him by just ending the evening there. Nowadays, I would have called it a night there and ran for the hills. So he convinced me to go for a drive for a little bit, so we could get to know one another. Just thinking about it makes me queasy. So we go for this drive, and he thought it would be a great time to show me the house he grew up in, so he drove me there. Only the house had been bulldozed, and he sat there in shock and sobbing that his house he grew up in was gone. So then he drives back, and we go for ice cream. He basically starts trying to molest me in the ice cream shop, like putting his hands down up my shirt and down my pants. It was really awkward. So it's to the point where I'm like, I have to be up for work early. I really did. I had to be at work at 7 a.m. the next day, and told him I wanted to go home. I thought I was free. I went back to my car, got in and started to drive away. Only as I am leaving he starts flashing his lights behind me, trying to signal that something was wrong. Here is where I should have played being a dumb blonde and just kept going. But I go back. He had a flat tire. So even though I don't know what I am doing, I stay with him to keep him company while he was changing the tire. Only he snaps the lug nuts off. I think he does this on 3 of them, and goes on a rampage throwing the heavy metal tool in my direction. Not at me, but he just kinda lost his cool and threw it without thinking. I was scared and just wanted to leave. Finally, after the 3rd lug nut broke off, he asked me if I could drive him home. He said he only lived about 15 minutes away. I felt really bad for him, so I drove him home. Only it wasn't 25 minutes away. It was almost an hour away. In the country. I had no idea where he was taking me. But I dropped him off and never looked back. He called me the next day, and I never answered, any of the 6 times he called. In retrospect, I should have left after the dinner. I should not have gone for a drive, and once we got back I should have left there instead of going for ice cream. I should have kept driving when he flashed his lights at me to get me to come back. It was really dangerous because no one knew I was with him, and I didn't know him that well. So ladies, please, never feel obligated to continue a bad date. You can always leave. You don't owe him anything, even your time. I learned my lesson. It could have turned out really bad, but luckily it didn't. Now I see how bad it really could have been. Story 20. I have affectionately named this date the crap attack. First date with my current boyfriend. It bears mentioning that we're both 20 and live in college campus apartments with 40-ish min walking distance in between. And he lives in the part of town in which you do not want to be out at night. We'd been hanging out for about a week when he asked if he could make me dinner. We had admitted to liking each other already, so definitely a date. Things were going a-okay up until the day before. Had to cancel because I got sick, but he was pretty adamant about rescheduling as soon as possible. It was so endearing that I agreed on a date before I was quite feeling okay. I took a bus over to his place because fuck that long-ass walk. I hung out on his bed while he showed me some video games, and I dozed off after a while. We woke up hours later snuggling, so some kissing was in order. And then I found out I took his first kiss, HNNNG. It remains a very tender moment in my memory. But it was like 10 p.m. at that point, and we were starving. I hung out in the living room while he worked on dinner. I was excited to show him Road to El Dorado, but he was pretty busy in the kitchen, and said there was nothing I could help with. My snuggly tater was busy making mashed potatoes and calling his mom for the preheat temp on the oven. He does this every time he makes dinner. So freaking cute. Well, I felt a little awkward watching a movie by myself and not helping. Now, I have to describe his living room, because I feel like the setting only enhances the story. This townhouse could not possibly look any more like it was inhabited by 3 college guys. Their giant living room contained only a handful of things. A broken futon that doesn't sit up, 2 camping chairs, a beer pong table, and a 12 inches tube TV with a VHS player installed on top. In fairness, in the years since I've been around they have added a couch, and they worship it like it was a gift from God himself. So on to the crap attack. We're finally eating our chicken and taters, sitting painfully awkwardly on that goddamn futon. The movie had kind of gone ignored since it was mostly done by then, so I tried to strike up conversation. But he was pretty quiet. He looked super uncomfortable. At this point I'm panicking a little internally, wondering if I was boring him. Then he urgently excused himself and bolted for the bathroom. Instead of using the downstairs bathroom, he went upstairs to his own bathroom, presumably for more discretion. But I don't think he considered just how thin the floors were since he'd only been living there a few months. And his bathroom is located right about the living room to boot. I heard everything. Every terrible cartoonish squelchy ass blast he had to give. For almost an hour I sat quietly rewatching Road to El Dorado, politely finishing my food, and trying so hard to not hear my host shit out his very soul. I wouldn't be surprised if he'd managed to rocket propel himself about with the force of his but stream. It was horrific. Eventually he dragged himself down the stairs to inform me that he was too sick for company and that I couldn't stay, apologizing like crazy. I was pretty confused at this point about the dramatic turn of events, and just kind of blandly packed my stuff and left. As soon as he closed the door I managed to react with one very loud, "What the fuck just happened?" So there I was, a considerable distance from my apartment, at about midnight, in a bad area, with almost no streetlights, in freezing weather. Awesome. Just fucking awesome. I love the crap out of that tater face.